So last week we talked about how. What's that? I don't think that's actually working. Okay, it is. We talked about how Peter's denial, we can kind of sort of look at his whole situation on the night before Jesus' death. We can kind of pick it apart and analyze different aspects of it and how we can apply different things to ourselves and try to avoid some of the traps that he fell into. And so I called that the anatomy of a fall. And I'm sure that there are some people out there that would say that he never lost relationship with Christ. But I think that we can kind of prove by looking at some of the things we're going to look at this morning. We can prove that there was a break in relationships, and certainly when we looked last week at Hebrews 2, we recognized that with it talks about neglecting so great a salvation, and that usually someone falling away is sort of a gradual process. Hebrews 3, which we did not look at last week, talks about being hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. And we recognize that that's typically going to be a process. And so it's kind of neat, the opportunity to look at somebody like Peter and be able to pull all of these different lessons from it. With Peter's denial, we first talked about pride. And I suggested that him saying, even though all the rest of these knuckleheads fall away, I won't. Even though they abandon you, I wouldn't ever do that. That there was pride in that, so that when we get to the end of that and it says, and they all said the same thing, I would suggest that they were all saying that they weren't gonna abandon Jesus. But Peter's the one that went the step further, the one that gets more violent about it, in a way more vocal, and saying, well, even though they might, I won't. And that there's a pride that we can see in that. And a little more difficult to see in it, but still something for us to pull out, especially when we think of the idea of drifting away. If you've ever lain in a boat or on a mattress on the water or something, and maybe in and out, maybe dozed on one, and then there you are, like way far away, and you didn't notice yourself drifting away. Jesus is in the garden, he's praying, he says, hey, follow me, watch with me, and then they fall asleep, they're stressed out, they're tired, and he says, so you couldn't watch with me for 1 hour, watch and pray that you don't enter into temptation. And so there's a lesson, there was a lesson in that for us. Also a lesson in cowardice. And he's willing to sort of follow, but he only follows at a distance, and we're able to pull out the possibility of a cowardice in that. And so as we get into this morning, instead of, it was 15 minutes ago because it was divided into two sermons, it's neat to go back to Mark 14, and we looked at Mark 14:54 last week. And we can make the application for ourselves about worldliness, and about worldliness being a threat to us, a threat to Christians. Mark 14 and verse 54. And Peter had followed him at a distance right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. All right. So here's something for you to think about. And maybe you've never thought about it this way. But he's at the fire of the enemy. Right? He's kind of non-committally, sort of halfway following to see what goes on or what's going to happen. But he's ashamed to be seen with Christ. It's a lot easier for him to be seen with the bad guys. He's really with the bad guys right now. And when we go, when we turn back to Proverbs 6. So Proverbs 6 has its own context. And its context is about being faithful to your husband or wife. And still, though, it gets at this idea that sometimes we flirt with things that we don't need to be flirting with. We're warming ourselves, metaphorically speaking, symbolically speaking, warming ourselves by the fire of the enemy. And so in this other context, you still see something we can take away in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 27 through 29. It says, "Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes in to his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished." So symbolically, we have this idea that Peter's warming himself by the fire of the enemy. Christy and I had to make a decision a long time ago, and the decision was about our kids, and we had to make the decision. We're making it, and everybody has to make this decision for themselves. We made the decision to homeschool because we had to say who's going to be able to influence who the most. I love you kids. I love you guys. I love my dog. But when it's 1 versus 25 in that classroom, I would me personally, I would not expect them to be able to withstand that sort of flood, that sort of flood of influence. And so we made that super personal decision that everybody's got to do for themselves. We made that decision to give them a little more time and not cut them off completely, but to limit their interaction with kids who didn't have the same kind of background, who didn't have the same kind of foundation that we were trying to give. And when we look in places like 1 Corinthians 15:33, in 1 Corinthians 15:33, we got Paul, and he's quoting a poet philosopher of their time. This is one that probably a lot of your moms used to say. You're going out the door. Maybe a mom said, "Oh, remember who you are," or they said, "Remember, evil companions corrupt good morals." And that's one of those things. Well, it's actually in the Bible. There's a lot of those things people think are in the Bible. Well, they're not technically there. This is. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:33, he's quoting one of their own philosophers. But as all truth is God's truth, if it exists and it's true, then God owns it. Paul appropriates it to say what he wants to say. In 1 Corinthians 15:33, he says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." And see it with kids, right? you see it with kids. I really have enjoyed the TV show Stranger Things. And I listen to music from Stranger Things. I listen to a lot of weird electronic music, stuff most of you probably hate. And there's a song from that soundtrack, This Isn't You. The song is called This Isn't You. And presumably it's playing, there's these two high school girls. And one doesn't have the stereotypical beauty, the skinniness and the facial beauty that that the world says is our picture of beauty. She's more overweight and she's not as pretty, but she's best friends with one of the main characters, who is very pretty, and she wants to be with this popular kind of rebel group that's doing the drinking and doing the party type of stuff. And Barb says, "This isn't you." And we've all seen it. We've all seen it in one way or another when someone was influenced over time, and it's like, that's not you. And so we have to see where we're being influenced. I'm influenced. I'm 44 years old, and I'm influenced by being around kids all the time, and they don't always influence it. They don't always influence me for the better. A lot, sometimes it's not me influencing them, and I'm the adult. I'm a preacher. I'm a Christian. I'm the one that you would think would have the biggest leg up on being strong and being like a rock in the storm or whatever just being so anchored, and I'm influenced. And so we all have to guard against it, and I wouldn't expect my kids to be able to be that strong either. And so then we come to the scariest verse, one of the scariest verses in the Bible, in Philippians 4 and verse 8. One of the most beautiful and, to me, in a way, frightening verses. Because in Philippians 4 and verse 8, you've got every single do and don't that you could possibly think of that was never written. That was never written down for you. In Philippians 4 and verse 8, it says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Now we're in the realm of wisdom. We're in the realm of discretion. We're in the realm of judgment and spiritual maturity. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful verse. It's that catch-all that's scary. Peter, in a way, we can look at him as warming himself by the fire of the enemy, putting himself in a dangerous place. Oh, yeah, you used to be an alcoholic? You're going to go sit in the bar and drink soda with your old friends? Yeah, I don't think that's happening. But people try. And of course, we haven't even read the denial. We haven't even, in Mark 14, we have not, in this week or last week, actually read the part where Peter denies Jesus. Mark 14, beginning in 66. "And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, 'You also were with the Nazarene, Jesus.' But he denied it, saying, 'I neither know nor understand what you mean.' And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, 'This man is one of them.' But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. So in a sense, right, he's warming himself by the fire of the enemy, speaking symbolically. In a sense, he is away from Jesus and at home with the world. And he finds himself denying Jesus. Matthew 10. As you're turning to Matthew 10, I want you to consider that there's really 3 types of confessing Jesus. Maybe. I think I've got this figured out. And 3 types of confessing Jesus. Yes, when our faith and our repentance leads us to put on Christ in baptism, we confess that Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, at that point in time. It's like a single point in time. But then there's also confessing Christ with your life. You know, I stop and help somebody who's on the side of the road and you're broken down, and I don't mention Jesus at all. I don't, you know, when we do stuff like that, we're confessing Him with our life. And then you've got this literal Peter having a chance to confess Christ and not doing it. In Matthew 10, beginning in 32. It says, "So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven." And so though we may not deny with words, we might do it with our actions. And it's tough because we tend to do it in little ways here and there. And so we're thankful for the grace of God. Call to assemble. When I say assemble, I'm talking about if the church has decided that this is a time that we're going to meet, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here. Called to assemble, but making excuses. Called to serve, but not serving. Me, called to preach, but not preaching. Been there. Called to stand close and suffer with Him, but standing in the safety of worldly things. In 2 Corinthians chapter 7, in 2 Corinthians 7, we have a situation here. You're welcome to get over there. So Paul's second letter there is part of what he's doing is he's responding to stuff that has happened in between the first and the second. In his first letter, he was talking to a congregation who had this sin going on right under their nose, and they were kind of like, they were winking at it. They were not really dealing with it. They weren't pointing it out, and in so doing, you know that when you do that, the person usually gets the idea that they're okay, and that you're okay with that. Whereas Ephesians 5 says, you know, sometimes it's not enough just to not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Sometimes you actually have to say something about it. Sometimes you have to reprove it. And so they got this man, he's living in sin, one of the members, and Paul calls them out on it saying, hey, you guys haven't even done anything about this. They do something about it after his letter. And the man repents. And then some of the people keep hammering the guy. He's already repented, he's changed, and they keep hammering this guy. And it's like, and Paul's like, okay. He's like, all right, it's good, it's enough. And he talks, let's look at this. I keep getting you guys there and then forgetting to turn there myself. 2 Corinthians 7, 8 through 10. He says, for even if I made you grieve with my letter, in other words, I spoke harsh words. I laid it all out there. And it was painful, right? Truth hurts. You've heard that expression before. Even if I made you grieve with my letter, I do not regret it, though I did regret it. For I see that the letter grieved you, though only for a while. As it is, I rejoice, not because you were grieved, but because you were grieved into repenting. For you felt a godly grief. Now, most of your Bibles probably say sorrow. You felt a godly grief, so that you suffered no loss through us. For godly grief produces a repentance that leads to salvation without regret, whereas worldly grief produces death. And there's no two people I can think of that perfectly fit into this than Peter and Judas. Peter and Judas, we've got two men. Well, I went too far. We've got two men, and they both deny Jesus at the end of his life. And Judas betrayed Jesus, right? Took the money, and then he goes, he throws the money away, and he goes and hangs himself. Sorrow of the world. Grief that produces death. It didn't take him where he needed to go. Peter, on the other hand, shows godly sorrow. Goes out and weeps bitterly. And then what we see later on is a real concrete sort of restoration. Turn to John 21. This is really a fascinating place to look. John 21 and verse 15. And this is after Jesus' resurrection. And we think, all right, Peter has his 3 denials, and then we're going to have 3 affirmations. And we have a difference that our English Bibles don't pick up. And the difference is that when Jesus says, "Do you love me?" he's using a different word than when Peter responds. When he's using what we, you got that agape coffee house out there. So most of you have heard the word agape. And that's like this big love, this godly love. This all through the Hebrew scriptures, it's a different kind of word. It's like God's steadfast love. This deep, just big love is agape love. And Jesus is going to give Peter a chance to be restored. And he's given Peter a chance to be humble. I'll explain what I mean, and it's just kind of my theory about this. Everybody's got their theories. John 21, 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." First of all, I love language. I like English. I'm really excited to be an English teacher. And I can't interpret that. I cannot tell if he's saying, "Do you love me more than you love these other men?" Or if he is saying, "Do you love me more than they love me?" The construction of the sentence just is not there for me to interpret. I don't think Peter's really answering the question. But I do think it's enough. I think what he does is enough. I think that Jesus is asking, do you really love me more than they love me? Because that's exactly what he had said earlier. He says, even though everybody else falls away, I won't. What's that code for? I love you more. And then Peter answers, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he uses a different word, phileo. Peter, do you agape me? It doesn't really work like that. And Peter says, yes, I phileo you. Think of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. That Philadelphia is coming from this Greek word of brotherly love, phileo. Jesus asks him if he loves him in one specific way, and Peter loves him. He loves him in a different way. And it's not a bad way. And brotherly love is a beautiful thing. But I wonder if this is Peter being humble. I'm done, Lord, thinking of myself higher than I ought to think. Thinking of myself as better than others. I'm not going to go that. I can't answer in that specific way. But here's what I can do. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. This is back in verse 15. Jesus said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved. Peter sees what's happening, right? 3 times, denied 3 times, Jesus asks him. Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And so he does. So he does. In his first letter, we find out very concretely that Peter is now an elder. And in 1 Peter 5, we understand that an elder is the same as a bishop, is the same as a pastor. Those 3 words are different descriptors for the same man. And in his letters, he gives us some advice on how we don't have to fall like he fell. We can avoid the temptations that he fell into. In 1 Peter 5, also, he talks about humility. 1 Peter 5, 5 through 6. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. Let God do the lifting up. You don't need to lift yourself up in front of other people. Peter kind of did that. But he knows better now. And he teaches us to know better. To ward off laziness, how do you read verses 8 and 9 and say that a lazy person can do that? Lazy person can't do any of what we read in verses 8 and 9. It says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Can't do that and be lazy. Cowardice earlier, chapter 4, verse 16. 1 Peter 4:16 says, yet if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in that name. Suffer as a Christian. Takes some strength. Courage isn't not being afraid. It's just keeping on in spite of it. Pushing through it in spite of it. Worldliness in chapter 2. Chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. And instead of denial, in chapter 3, there is more affirmation. 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. So, pretty cool. We circle back. We circle around from the little things that we were able to pull out of Peter's situation and go like, wow, okay, I can see here there's a real concrete problem that he had. Here on a more abstract, like metaphorical level, I can get that. I can take that away from it. And then all the things that he'll say 20, 30 years later in his letters, and all the growth that he's done and all the growth that he wants us to get busy with. So we end it there, and if there's a need that you have for a physical problem that you're having or a spiritual problem that you're having, just some encouragement. I was thinking about when Eddie was talking about the offering and talking about our blessings, and I was like, I always think of all those same things, all the clothes, the shelter, all that stuff. But a real big physical blessing is my brothers and sisters. That's really the biggest one I have as far as like a physical blessing. Yeah, physical, spiritual, whatever overlap. But so I'm thankful that you're all here. Let's remember that we can bear each other's burdens. And if you have a need to respond in some way, please let us know as we sing 186.
I stand